So welcome everyone. I'm hoping that this is just, a um an alert, a little bit of a warning, and it doesn't necessarily mean a return to federal enforcement, but I was starting to see a bunch of misinformation and confusion, and so I thought it would be easier just instead of answering each of the hundreds of emails, just to hold a meeting so that we could discuss this and kind of give folks an update of what's happening. So on Friday last week, the U.S. Attorney from Washington, D.C. sent a letter to Theory Pot Dispensary, basically telling them that they were in violation of federal law. But not only, he didn't just send this letter, so it was like behind the scenes kind of thing. He issued a press release with the letter. And this dispensary is a licensed dispensary in DC. He referenced, that the U.S. Attorney was getting letters from parents about it being 1,000 feet from schools, and use that as an excuse um, to step out of bounds of the CJS amendment and, ask the dispensary owners a question or some questions. And so, he didn't say, I'm coming to shut you down, right? But if you haven't read the press release of the letter, it's pretty unnerving to say, as you likely know, there are lots of federal laws that are prohibiting the distribution of and possession of marijuana, including those of the Controlled Substance Act. And so he says it appears that your dispensary is operating in violation of federal law. And so of course we all know that. That's why we've been trying to change those laws. But the fact that he's talking specifically about schools is a little unnerving as well. And he sort of ended his letter asking these questions, right? And so this, I think because he issued the press release, this was something to get everyone asking these questions. Are they aware of federal laws, and their locations near schools? And I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about that statute. Have they addressed these issues with federal law enforcement officials? I don't remember that, like, bring your dispensary to work day. Can you produce documentation regarding your compliance with federal law? And so I have talked to the operators. They're a mom and pop shop in DC. They're um, pretty unnerved by this, but they are definitely in compliance with the law. So the CJS amendment that we first passed in 2014 has basically stayed the same since we passed it, except for we added more states. Well done. But basically, what it says is that none of the funds under the appropriations bill for the Department of Justice, they can't use any of those funds to prevent any of these states from implementing their own laws to authorize the use, distribution, possession, and cultivation of medical marijuana. And so that also includes where these can be located, right? And so most states have some kind of special use requirement in their laws. Most of them just have 1,000 feet from schools. Some communities have passed additional laws. And in Washington, D.C., it can be pretty hard to find a location that is not near a church, and that's true for lots of cities. And so there have been variances that have been passed in certain cities. There have been exceptions made for certain dispensaries. But again, this is very clear that the Department of Justice should not be weighing in on these matters, right? And that there's the District of Columbia right there. So this protection under CJS has been made clear through case law. So during Trump 1, when he appointed Attorney General Keebler-Elf, just kidding, Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, we were all pretty frightened because one of the first things he did was actually remove the Cole memo and said he was going to come after, start, returning to the days of raids and shutting down dispensaries. And he found pretty quickly that he did not have the authority to do that as it pertained to medical cannabis because of the CJS amendment. And then, of course, he fell out of favor with Trump. Um, Thank you, Putin. So, why this is also a little unnerving right now is that last year, when we were going through the appropriations bill, remember this, because it's part of the Department of Justice's appropriations bill, we have to pass this with every budget every year. And of course, we definitely did not imagine back in 2014 when we first passed that we would be here today. We thought that was going to be, the first step to then passing federal medical cannabis laws. We haven't quite done that yet. But the House CGS appropriations bill last year was amended mostly in an effort led by Republicans. And they passed an amendment that said that they wanted to stop any efforts about rescheduling. And then they also, though, modified our appropriations amendment, adding a new section. And the section that they added was this B. They added this B part here that says that the funds available under the act, under the Department of Justice can be used to enforce violations of 21 USC 860. And I'm sure you guys all know what that is, as you've all memorized the Controlled Substance Act, I'm sure. So what that section is that most people know this as school-free zones. You see those signs up like around parks that say, this is a school-free zone. Well, it's based on this section of the Controlled Substance Act, which says that anyone distributing or possessing with intent to distribute a controlled substance act in or within 1,000 feet of a public or private elementary school, vocational, secondary school, public or private, college, junior college, university, playground, housing facility owned by the Public Housing Authority, or within 100 feet of a youth center, public swimming pool, video arcade, roller rink, just kidding, that they would be subject to actually twice the maximum punishment. So not only are they saying, we think that the Department of Justice should be able to enforce the federal cannabis laws in states with medical cannabis programs, but we think they should be able to enforce this statute, which is pretty hefty. And so I know it's been a while since maybe people thought about cannabis being illegal, but it is. And it actually holds some pretty hefty fines and offenses. So most dispensaries or retail shops, are facing multiple felonies, and because of the mandatory minimums, a dispensary could be facing 20 years, 40 years. And if they were doing so in a location where they have been licensed by their state to do so, those fines could double. Right. And, this is real. Like this is like we have not changed these laws. And right now there's absolutely nothing protecting adult use, right? The medical, this is all we have is the CJS amendment. So, Congress didn't pass any bill last year for appropriations. But right after the members of Congress passed that CJS amendment, there was a letter, you may remember, that was sent to Attorney General Garland from 25 Republicans condemning the rescheduling request, right? That he even considered following HHS's advice And, you know, this is pretty typical in DC, right? There's something you don't like and there's a reaction. And a lot of this came from, the media coverage around rescheduling was really focused um, on tax deductions, and really focused on this being a bid for the White House ploy by Biden, right? And so we were seeing a lot of partisan lines get redrawn around cannabis, and we weren't that surprised to see this letter. But the reason I have these things highlighted is that with the Republicans taking control of the Senate last year, um, those Republicans, the people who signed that letter, are actually now all in, unfortunately, very key positions. So Thune, who was on that letter, actually is Senate leadership, which is he is going to decide what comes to the floor. He's going to decide the agenda for the Senate. But when we look at also the CJS subcommittees in both the House and the Senate, both of these gentlemen were on that letter. And we look at ag as we're going to be dealing with the farm bill supposedly this year. Harris, who was on that letter, Jobin wasn't on that letter, but he is very anti cannabis. And then HHS, FDA, also the chairs in both the House and Senate were on these letters. Were on those letters. So I feel like what's a little unnerving is that a lot of people got involved in cannabis in maybe the last 10 years. And so they don't really remember the days of the raids, and people have kind of retold the story of those raids. But there were hundreds of people that went to jail that were prosecuted. A majority of this activity actually happened under the Obama administration. Part of that was because there were so many. But this next version of the CJS bill is going to be coming up in September. And right now on the CJS on the Appropriations Committee, they have last year's version, and it looks like that's what they're going to be advancing. So again, going back to the letter that the U.S. Attorney sent, the fact that he was focusing in on the provision around schools makes me nervous. And I think on its face, his letter, this is in violation of the CJS amendment. But I think we have to be, you know, we have to show solidarity in this response and really make sure that Congress knows that this is unacceptable. And so, I don't, again, if for folks who have been a part of the cannabis space in the last 10 years, you may not remember or know what it was like getting to the point of passing the CJS amendment. And I want to just kind of tell you guys some of the highlights so we can be organized and ready as these things start to happen. So one of the first things that usually happens. Oh, and by the way, we actually launched Americans for Safe Access in response to these raids. And in fact, one of our first actions was we served DEA offices in 55 cities with cease and desist orders. And over a period of time, we gave them citations. I think at one point we evicted them. But the other part of enforcement of these laws is that you cannot talk about the state laws in federal court. So if somebody is being prosecuted under the federal cannabis statutes, they can't bring up the fact that they have a state license. The jury can't hear that. The jury can't hear that they were acting in accordance with state laws. And this was actually a series of ads that we ran around like 2004 because there were a whole series of prosecutions happening, and we knew that juries around California would have no idea that the people in that courtroom were medical cannabis providers. And so again, because I don't know if this comes from self-preservation or people just don't want to believe it's happening, but what we definitely experience is that people are always looking for reasons beyond the fact that cannabis is illegal federally of why a raid was happening. And so, I've already heard people talking about this recent letter that, oh, well, they're in the wrong place. They shouldn't be that close to a school. Well, the District of Columbia gave them that license, right, under the protections of CJS. And so, deciding that you're going to wait to respond or react until something looks more like you can be really dangerous. Um, you know, we've seen a lot of misinformation put out by DEA and federal government over the years. And so this is really where solidarity comes into place. And I feel like a big difference of where we are today versus where we were 2 decades ago, was that we really identified as a movement. Like the people who were providing us cannabis, like we knew them. We appreciated that they were committing a federal civil disobedience. They utilize their retail shops to organize patients, to organize their communities and prepare them for a raid. And I imagine that if people were driving down the street and they saw law enforcement in front of a dispensary, I think one, they would probably assume that they were doing something wrong. And my guess is they wouldn't stop and protest. They'd probably drive to the next one. And so we were able to really build a strong coalition, a strong movement behind stopping these raids. And a lot of the organizations that we worked with back then have kind of stepped aside because they felt like I don't know that they were used or that medical cannabis was a wolf in sheep's clothing as they started seeing more of a focus on adult use. So we don't have the same strong coalition that we had in the past. But the other thing that this is actually took up a lot of the work that we did in the beginning of Americans for Safe Access. And I'm actually going to be doing an abbreviated raid preparedness training tomorrow at our Lunch and Learn webinar at noon. But one of the things that we first did is we went to people in dispensaries and cultivation sites and trained their staff on what to do if there was a raid. And this included, uh, role plays on how to deal with law enforcement interrogations and making sure that they had a plan inside the dispensary so that people were safe. We had these for people who worked in dispensaries and in cultivation or manufacturing sites or laboratories, anywhere in the supply chain. We would, we had this huge database and people would tell us what they needed. Like if they were raided, and in custody, did they need somebody to, they need us to call someone to pick up their kids from school? Do we need, someone to go feed their dog or water their plants? Just to make sure that while they were being interrogated, that they could actually just be present and not have to sign something because they felt pressure to get out of jail. And so we probably did. Um, I don't know. I mean, I personally, did over 500 of these trainings, and we obviously trained a lot of staff and others to do these trainings. And then we had a raid response support. So that was sort of the support inside the dispensaries and inside the cannabis businesses, but outside in our communities, we actually had this raid response plan, which I was very happy when texting became thing because in the early days we had a phone tree. So if we got a call that there was a raid happening, we would start calling press and start calling other people and let them know that this raid was happening. And then it kind of evolved into this text alert system. So we all had signs in our cars. And so if you're, driving down the street or if you're at work and you got a notification, everybody would head over to the dispensary and stand outside and observe and be present and make sure that the public knew what was happening. And again, we don't have this right now. This does not exist. And so if there was um, some type of enforcement, I don't know how long it would take people to respond. And I think also, people would take a long time trying to figure out, and, really hoping that there was something else that was happening. Once there were, this was easy to carry out when there was 11 dispensaries in the country. But as our community began to grow, we had to add a step to this that included somebody near them that could go double check and make sure that the dispensary was being rated. Um, and so, like I said, like we held these, I mean, 500 raids, y'all. Like this was intensive. Our chapters and our allies, we got people to sign a pledge of resistance saying that they would show up in protest if this happened. And again, I'm just taking some time to show you guys that this took a lot of work, right? That this wasn't just some organic thing that happened. And that, if we do find ourselves in a situation where there is enforcement, we're going to have to get organized. But we also, made sure that nobody was in a trial without supporters in the courtroom, outside the courtroom, made sure that there was news coverage. And then in 2003, we got the CJS amendment introduced. So it took us 11 years to pass the CJS amendment. And the way that we continued to build up support for that was through these responses. And this is actually part of a presentation that's called 20 years. So I just pulled out some of the highlights. We a lot of states were actually, hoping the feds would come in and they would actually not implement their medical cannabis laws. And we were part of a lawsuit that actually found that state laws aren't preempted by federal law, that they exist in conflict. And this was really what, even though we were in this sort of crazy conflict, why states were able to continue implementing these laws. But this went on. I mean, we're talking about, over a decade of these raids. And luckily we had Mikowski, who, actually, once we passed the CJS amendment in the House, was able to push it across. But I also want to just highlight this piece of history before I start answering some questions. And that is that when Obama was elected, there was a memo that went out by his Department of Justice, right? And everybody thought that this was just going to take care of everything, right? That there would be no more raids. We thought it. We were hopeful. But what happened was, because that wasn't binding in any way, we started seeing U.S. attorneys take their own interpretations of that memo. And so raids were continuing, right? We were seeing that even with that memo in place. And so the Obama administration, um, we started seeing like all these U.S. attorneys, like what the U.S. attorney that just wrote the letter the other day, was actually, contacting the states and saying, "Hey, your program is illegal," and this was with that memo in place. And so then the Department of Justice issued another memo, the Ogden memo, or otherwise known as the 1984 memo, where he says, "Oh no, that's not actually not what Obama said before. That's not what we meant. U.S. attorneys can still do whatever they want." And so we saw even more raids, right? And more prosecutions. And for a while, we hadn't seen a lot of prosecutions. Most of the raids were what we called smash and grabs. But even under Obama is when we really started seeing a resurgence of these prosecutions. Um, sorry, that didn't come out very nicely. And then we actually couldn't get Congress to introduce the CJS amendment because everybody thought that Obama had taken care of everything, and so there couldn't be raids. And so we ended up actually creating this report called "What is the Cost?" And we had our first DC based conference and lobby day where we brought patients from around the country to DC to tell their members of Congress, like, hey, the memos from Obama are not working. And with this, again, these are sort of a look at all of the raids that were going on. But with this, we had, Obama put out a third memo, and we looked through it and we're like, hopefully this one will work. And U.S. attorneys came out and said, like, look, we don't have to follow that memo, right? And so again, we were trying to get Congress to move forward with the CJS amendment, and it was finally like these U.S. attorneys coming out and saying, look, we are not going to listen to those memos. And then there was a raid on a gentleman, Larry Harvey, in Washington State, an individual patient, that was really sort of the last straw for Congress. And Larry, this is how Larry spent the last few months of his life, actually helping us pass the CJS amendment. We ran attack ads, right? We had to do all this organizing to get to a point where Mikulski would step forward. And so we finally passed it, right? It was finally there. There were court lawsuits because U.S. attorneys kept saying they were going to still prosecute people. And so we had to step in and actually take the Obama Department of Justice to court and found, like, yes, this appropriation or this amendment protects the state laws. And so we survived through sessions, as I mentioned before. And so now we have, this next administration where we're not sure. I mean, people had a lot of high hopes of what would happen. We just saw, Trump just put out his drug priorities, but we've been hearing a lot of people in his administration use the words drug war. There was something that happened under Obama that not necessarily everyone understood, but Obama actually lowered the power of the Office of the National the ONDCPs, it's drug policy, sorry, from a drug czar to just so it was a cabinet position, and actually demoted that position to just an executive office. And I don't know if that's something that Trump would do. It's pretty scary because before that, federal agencies had to get the sign off of ONDCP of their budget before they could pass it with Congress. Right. And that's where we got lovely things like DARE. We saw the drug war being carried out across every agency. And so, when you look at some of the items in Project 2025, I think it seems like having a drug czar again would be right up their alley. So as I mentioned, this is still here on the website. They're still pointing to the CJS amendment that was passed in the last Congress. This is something that we're going to have to defeat. And I don't think that many people know about it. I mean, I'm wondering if you guys, I guess, using your icons. I mean, did everybody know last year that this passed? Did everybody know that this was happening? I don't think that members of Congress know either. And so, we also have within this administrative agency a real disrespect for the courts, right? And that is really discerning when we know that, the McClintock case, other cases have really protected us. And then we have this sort of conversation about the hemp bill sort of playing out in the public, with DEA being very clear that they think everything is illegal. There are, Republican governors of only 8 of the states that have legalization. The DEA hearings were postponed. So we're just not sure what's happening. But when we look at the chessboard of what we have been working on, we've been moving these pieces forward so that we could actually integrate cannabis into our healthcare systems. That's where we are on our timeline, right? And this is where we should be getting to a point where we can introduce legislation to create a national program. This statement is what we've been working for 23 years, to get recognition that there is currently accepted medical use. And whether, we don't think cannabis should be on any of the schedules, Schedule 1 through 5. And that's why we've created our own schedule. And lots of people agree with this idea, right? The Congressional Research Service has said that Congress can create a new schedule. They said they can create a new regulatory framework for cannabis. We know there's bipartisan support for cannabis, for medical cannabis. And so we have everybody asking Congress to do something. And so our bill right now is actually in Ledge Council. This is the little draft here. But we will have a version that's ready to start getting co-sponsors in May, when hopefully you guys all come to DC. So the Patients First, this summit and lobby day, this is where, we were actually hoping just to really, focus a lot on getting co-sponsors. But obviously, we're going to have to talk about the CJS amendment as well and really make sure that we're educating Congress and Senate about that bill and the fact that we're already seeing activity of U.S. attorneys. And what's clear to me is that the sentiments of POTUS, don't stand up. The U.S. attorneys can still do whatever they want, and so we're going to need Congress to step up. And the CJS amendment is important. It has been important, but let's face it, it's triage. It's not good legislation. Just telling someone not to spend money on something while it's still illegal, it's got us to where we are, which, lots of patients can't use cannabis. We don't have protections under the American Disabilities Act. And so on May 18th, which is a Sunday, we're going to be doing some citizen lobbying training. So if you haven't ever met with your elected officials, don't worry, we're going to train you. We're going to let you practice, and we'll probably send you in with other people. And we're going to take that time to really do some deep dive into utilizing some of ACE's campaigns for when you get home. And then, if you sign up for the lobby day, we will make sure that you have a meeting with your Senate offices and your member of Congress. And so we'll make sure you have the handouts you need. You're going to be prepared. I've met so many people that were, super nervous, and then after the lobby day, I can't get them to stop lobbying, right? Like once you realize how easy it is to get your voice heard. And then of course, you can take that iconic Capitol Hill selfie that everybody wants. So I'm gonna leave this open for a second, but you can RSVP. I need folk, like if you want to come, please RSVP because I need to get a location for the summit and I have no idea who's coming, right? And we don't have discretionary funds right now. So if you plan to come, you don't have to pay right now. You can just say, I want to come so I can, in the next week, secure a location for the event. And it's okay if you decide not to, but if you think you're going to come, please let me know. And thank you to those who have RSVP'd. If your organization is interested in partnering with us, you can send me an email or you can go to this part of the site. A partnership just means you're going to help us get the word out, help us get people there. All of these tools are on the website and we can jump back into them in a minute. But I'll also send around this presentation for everyone as well as the recording. Let me just get through. The last thing I say is that I have done so many of these presentations about our legislation, about the CJS amendment, and all these presentations, you can download them and you can do these presentations for your community. I definitely can reach a lot of people, but if everyone on this call did one presentation, right, eventually we would reach the nation. So just know that you don't have and you don't even have to invite me. I appreciate folks inviting me to speak to your organizations. I'm happy to do that, but I'm also happy to help you feel comfortable doing the presentation yourself. So in the next few days, where right now I'm working with the folks in DC to try to get more of a sense of what's happening, talking to the in an ideal world, the Attorney General in DC and the DC Council would be the ones responding to this letter, and that's what we're hoping will happen. And we just don't have a sense of what of what they're planning to do. But something else that you guys can do now is if you haven't reached out to your member of Congress, you can, take that letter and just send it to them and say, "Hey, FYI, what does this mean? We have a U.S. attorney coming in violating the CGS amendment. I just wanted you to know this happened." And so you can use, one of the, this existing email that we have here. You can change it, add whatever language, but this is really important that we don't wait until there are hundreds of dispensaries being closed down for this to be the first time that they hear from you. Because remember, like, it is not the job of members of Congress to represent every law in your state. It is, though, their job to represent their constituents. And so if they don't hear from you, they have no obligation to step in and work on this. They have no, there's no reason, they don't have to do anything. And, especially for folks of the GOP, this is a controversial issue for them. But if they have tons of, requests from their community, they're going to pay attention. And even, one email, one phone call, their staff is going to start looking for information about this. You've got to put it on their radar. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of shit happening in DC right now. And medical cannabis may not be on the front of people's minds. We also know that there's a lot of misinformation that members of Congress have, that they think that either the scheduling was going to fix all this or adult use is going to fix all these issues for patients. So, we really need more people being that sort of trusted source for their members of Congress. Okay, so let me look at the Q&A. Oh, it looks like people were using the chat. Okay. Yeah, so I see a lot of comments about the actual dispensary, and that there are powerful people in these schools that uh, nice. Lots of people saying they loved Lobby Day. Very good. Let's see any specific questions. So if you guys have a specific question. Yeah, so I think some of the big differences over the years, Americans for Safe Access, I mean, right now we have no staff. We're a very we have an amazing, dedicated volunteers that are doing this work. But when we first passed the CJS amendment, we had a $2 million budget. And, that's how we were able to run ads and to, fly folks out to DC. We were, able to respond to all of these raids. And, these didn't come from, our funds didn't come from cannabis businesses, they came from individuals. And so, if you are not an ASA member, it's pretty easy to become one. It is our 23rd birthday this month, and so we actually have um, uh, a special for a $23 membership that I can send out to everyone. So please sign up, but you don't have to give just $23. If you'd like to give more, please do. If there are more people that you would like, if you're already a member, you can buy someone else a membership. But we really need resources to both put forward a proactive campaign and to be ready to respond to whatever happens. And right now, I've maxed out my credit cards and taken out some personal loans, but it's not sustainable. And if we don't start bringing funds into ASA, I'm not sure that we'll be here. Obviously, our volunteers will always volunteer in some capacity, but I think, when we see where we are in our fight, it's time to go. Oh, so yeah, so the May 18th, there's Sunday and Monday for Kelly had the question. And here I'll put the sorry to jump around so fast. Put this one up. Let's see, that has the RSVP. So you can go to 2025 underscore leadership summit, underscore summit, or you can use that QR code. Um, I'm hoping that, if we start seeing more activity that, that people are just mindful that there is a lot of misinformation that's put out. Um, if there is a letter sent to a dispensary, the federal government under the CJS amendment has no business weighing in on that business, no matter what they're doing. And so, we have zero zero tolerance policy for federal interference. And one of the things that we've seen a tactic is to try to pull people off of the edges, right, and try to get the community to turn against them. And what will end up happening is that when more people are being attacked, there won't be anyone left to defend you, right? And so I just want to be mindful and a lot of people may not know that that's a tactic, right? So before you repeat something about a targeted business, make sure that you're looking for trusted sources. Not everyone who runs a dispensary is a saint, but neither is everyone in Washington, right? Like, it's not our business, like what people were doing before. They are operating a legal business. What is our business is that we passed a law to stop these raids, and they 1000%, we can't go backwards, right? And so, I know some of you have heard me beating the drum um, about the CJS amendment over the last year, and this is why. I mean, I think that I don't think it's a coincidence that this U.S. attorney mentioned the state law, or that mentioned the laws around being near schools. And obviously, that's an easy way to get public support, is to say like, oh yeah, we're fine with medical cannabis. We're just not fine with it around schools. And so when this passed last year, I started looking to see like how many businesses would be impacted. But then I actually stopped doing that work because I didn't want to like put out a report that would help the DEA find those businesses. So, but I did look at all of the state laws, and we definitely that no one talks about arcades, video arcades for sure, but there are not anything beyond schools. Some have maybe daycare centers, but our laws have nothing about colleges. They definitely don't mention federal housing authorities. And so there's likely thousands of cannabis businesses that could be targeted by the DEA if that amendment passes. So there is no sitting on the sidelines now. The ball is in action, right? Like it's on the court. There's no place to sit out. And I don't know how many other ways to say this, but I'm going to give you all permission to get on your soapboxes with your communities as well. But if you are not calling your member of Congress, they are not hearing about this. And if they are, they're probably hearing about it from law enforcement. So we know that the Kevin Sabatts of the world are in DC talking to members of Congress. And it's really our job to get this message to DC. Are there any other questions about these activities or about the uh, the summit and lobby day? And I apologize. I wish I could just jump into the screen where we could all be talking, but let's see. Thank you, Eric. Says he might be uh, able to host a fundraising event in DC. Thank you. Yes, I would be interested. Um, get into fivecalls.org. No, but I will, Julie. Thank you for that advice. Playgrounds, yes, yes, playgrounds. Carrie, it also says video arcades. It does not say roller rinks, but it also says video arcades. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think that, Kevin Sabat is getting around. This is sort of his heyday. And the other thing that's happening in DC that I just want people to be aware of. Oh, hi, Chris. Let me see if I can get into the Q&A. I apologize. I'm flying solo without any tech support here. Chris, I know that's before. Yes, thank you for that, Chris. Yes, I do use a lot of independent media, but I would love to follow up with you after like this week to touch base about that. But yes, we'll use any means to get this the word out. And Cody, what main limit should we address? I'm not sure what you mean by limit. Oh, main issues. So I think, for reps, I think that I think just sending the letter that they sent to the dispensary in DC, or even his press release, give them a copy of it and say, hey, I'm very concerned about this, that this is in violation of the CJS amendment. And, is this what we can expect? And just get it on their radar. And the other thing to point out is that we actually have a solution. And I think this is really where I think it is our day, is that it's been 10 years, right, of the CJS amendment. It's been 10 years of just sort of this legal limbo. And I feel like, Congress is ready for some solutions, right? They're being pulled in lots of directions around the farm bill, around hemp, which we all know, it's the cannabis plant people want. We're just talking about hemp in a lot of cases because of the loopholes. Um, but it is, it's time for Congress to see a vision of how to move forward. And, we've been working hard to get consensus in our community for that. Um, Yes, I will send around a link to this recording. And yes, before Lobby Day, we'll also put out a bunch of information about what to expect, the lines, etc. There is less staff in the buildings. There's actually a lot less federal employees. I don't know if you know that, so that can make everything run a little longer. And let's see if there are any other Q&A. So I'll just leave you guys with this note, which is this sentiment, is that until we change these laws, we're always going to be in this situation, right? That we're completely at the sort of whim of POTUS, or of the elections. And we have done our work. We have put in the work. We've changed, international drug treaties so that we can move forward in this country with medical cannabis access. And I think you'll find that members of Congress are ready to hear a solution and not just bickering, right? It's enough. People are tired of saying what they don't want. And what we have that maybe not everyone has is that we know what we want. We know what a national medical cannabis program should look like. And we're, doing the work to get consensus in our community. We're doing the work to bring this to other healthcare stakeholders. And we just can't let anything slip at this point. So, um, you know, I'm working again with the operators, so we haven't put out like a big public statement because we want to make sure that they feel comfortable. We're helping them find legal counsel and to kind of get their response together. But so definitely look out for comments from us. We'll be sending out an action alert for you to write to your members of Congress, but don't wait. Let your community know, like, this 100% is a violation of the CJS amendment, and it's absolutely dangerous. So if somebody says to you, well, it was 300 feet from the school, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it was in a school. If they have a license from the state, the CJS amendment has said that they cannot interfere. And so if we look for excuses for one letter to be okay, I promise you it will be a slippery slope. So, like, let's be kind to one another. There's definitely, just human nature to hope that there was some reason why that was an isolated incident and it will never happen to anyone in your community, but we don't know that, right? And right, it was a pretty ignorant letter. Um, and it's, as somebody who like has slept with a cell phone next to my head until we pass a CJS amendment to stop the raids, anything is possible. But I am optimistic, and I know that within our movement, as long as we are mindful and putting out truth and organizing and focusing people towards a solution, that we're going to get there. So thank you guys so much for spending an hour with me this evening, and I hope I see you all in DC. If you're thinking about coming, even if you're just like halfway there, please RSVP so I can find a location that is appropriate. Um, with the remnants of COVID around, we just can't cram everybody in a tiny room. And without a big budget, I can't just rent a giant hotel room. So, I mean, hotel space. So thank you all so much and have a good night.